Let's talk about the budget. I know, roll your eyes, right? But budgets are not boring if you know what to look for. Hey, it's season 2 of Breaking History. Mark Trahant here. Remember, if you like this content, just take a second to share, subscribe, and add a comment. We're talking budgets, and there's a lot of history. President Donald Trump released the federal government's budget request to Congress for the next fiscal year. Huge budget cuts for most domestic programs, as well as a request for $1.5 trillion for the Iran war. Shortly after the budget release, the president was musing about what we can't afford as a country, and he says daycare, Medicaid, and Medicare should not be federal issues.
The United States can't take care of daycare. That has to be up to a state. We can't take care of daycare. We're a big country. We have 50 states. We have all these other people. We're fighting wars. We can't take care of daycare. You got to let a state take care of daycare, and they should pay for it, too. They should pay. They have to raise their taxes, but they should pay for it. And we could lower our taxes a little bit to them to make up, but it's not possible for us to take care of daycare. Medicaid, Medicare, all these individual things, they can do it on a state basis. You can't do it on a federal. We have to take care of one thing, military protection. We have to guard the country.
And those budget projections include major cuts for programs serving Native Americans. More on that shortly. Let's take a step back and explore some history. Government spending on Indian programs predates what is now the United States. The Continental Congress largely focused on wartime management, including money for treaties, Indian agents, and a few goods. The Continental Congress recognized that treaties were cheaper than war, and that legislative body did not have much money. In the Gilded Age, a time in history that OMB Director Russell Vought would like to return, there really was no federal domestic spending. He was the principal author of Project 2025, and one thing that document said was praising the genius of the Gilded Age. Tariffs, low regulation, the making of America first. In the Gilded Age, life on Indian reservations was particularly bleak. Public programs were limited to some food distribution, including white flour, a food that Indians did not even eat at the time and eventually led to the diabetes problems in our generation.
So they took that white flour, mixed it with water, and then put it over the open stove with a skillet and fried it. That's where fried bread came from. I tell people, our bodies were not created for white flour. And so diabetes, the foundation for diabetes began when they brought white flour to it.
In 1921, Congress enacted the Snyder Act. That piece of authorizing legislation does not expire, and it gives the federal government the power to fund general support services for Native Americans. This is where it gets really complicated. The federal government has 2 tracks for how it spends money. First, a program must be authorized by Congress, and that's what the Snyder Act did. Then, the actual dollars come through the appropriations process. And in the 1920s, that took time. In fact, in 1928, there was a survey by the Institute for Government Reform, what is now the Brookings Institution. The Merriam Report found a series of absolute failures that locked indigenous people into poverty. That report led to the reforms and the so-called Indian New Deal in the early 1930s. At that point, federal spending on tribal lands began to grow, at least until World War II. From 1944 to 1948, the United States cut spending by 75%. Domestic spending was an issue before Congress when it came to the payment of Indian claims, and that created the logic for what we now call the termination era. That's when the federal government just threw up its hands and walked away from promises that it made in treaties. Representative Henry Jackson, a Democrat from Washington, was chairman of the Indian Affairs Committee in 1944. He said, "I have about as few Indians in my district as any district in the country, probably no more than 2,000 or 3,000 in the entire district." Yet he said he continually had personally given a lot of thought to the complicated nature of Indian law. "Still, it's getting worse every year," he said. "A lot of the Indians have gone to school, graduated, they've come back to the reservation and lived there. Why? Because they feel if they leave, they will lose their enrollment status and they will not be able to participate in their ancestral claim if it's settled. So they go back to the reservation." It's such nonsense. In that same debate, Jackson complained that Indians cost more than Congress itself. The last decade or so, except for Trump's first term, was once again a period of substantial investment in Indian country, especially projects that were building for the long term, such as those focused on education or are building infrastructure for clean energy. So now we have another terrible Trump budget. The proposal is to continue to shrink Indian programs in the BIA and cut any funds that are woke or that build alternative energy. Gas and oil are the only acceptable answers. The Trump budget proposed slashing, again, federally chartered colleges such as the Institute for American Indian Arts. And here's the thing, the budget would strip all of the Institute's federal funding, $13.5 million to zero. The Institute's board puts it this way, this would devastate IAIA's ability to sustain its academic programs, student support, and day-to-day operations. It would place at risk an institution that has served as an international center for contemporary indigenous art and cultural leadership for more than 60 years.
And one New Mexico college is preparing for another round of proposed budget cuts after the federal government tried axing their funding last year.
We're much more prepared this year than we were last year. We're going to continue to move it forward, and we want to ensure that the community knows that we're doing that.
For the second year in a row, the Institute of American Indian Arts is facing hefty federal budget cuts on the heels of the Trump administration's DOGE cuts last year that nearly took millions from them.
It's become clear that an institution like IAI is not a priority for this administration, or at least the president's office in this administration.
With almost 1,000 students and 140 staff members, the Institute has been serving the community since 1962. Last year, President Trump's administration proposed similar budget cuts for the Institute, but failed in the long run. This year, the administration is calling for yet another round, with a proposed cut of $2.7 billion from higher education programs in the country, where $354 million is being taken from minority-serving institution programs, something IAIA falls under.
That's not all. The administration is proposing deep cuts to tribal housing programs, community development, urban Indian health, which is already a tiny slice of the budget, as well as the elimination of community finance institutions. In other words, it's back to the future, a government that's like the Gilded Age. Few services and even fewer people to do the work. I was in Washington, D.C. during the Reagan years, and I remember a lot of really bad budgets, basically cutting programs by 1/3 across the board. But that never happened. Congress appropriates funds, not the president. The budget is only a messaging statement. It's what the president would like to do. I remember being in a hearing with the real power. Back then it was Representative Sidney Yates, a Democrat from Illinois. He was a class of legislators who considered themselves appropriators. They were responsible for spending, not the president. One report said the budget had a chilly reception in the House. That chilly reception was Sid Yates. Yates is gone, but the mindset of an appropriator is still around. Maine's Susan Collins sometimes carries that. Last year, Trump was able to win her over, and now we're starting to see the damage from that era, especially in healthcare programs such as Medicaid. If Congress agrees with the president this time on the Iran war, that means they'd have to find an additional $1.5 trillion to cut from domestic programs. The president will try to do this through reconciliation again. And that means he would need 218 votes in the House and 50 in the Senate. That's not a sure thing. The House majority is thinner than it was a year ago. The current makeup of the House is 218 to 214. So if one Republican defects, it's still a margin of 217 to 215. If two defects, or someone doesn't show up, well, it's going to be a fight. The math is similar in the Senate because several senators are concerned about the damage from these deep cuts. The road ahead is going to be complicated, but it's going to be awful interesting. I'm Mark Trahant, and this is Breaking History. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next week.